the micro execution ruined it. Like,
Now, I'll
I don't
also say
want
this, because I was considering this the other day, just trying to be as fair as possible and give the haters the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if we would be doing it like this if the pacing just was faster, and I don't mean in terms of story, I mean in terms of real life. Like, if we didn't have a month between releases, if it wasn't monthly, if it was weekly, and if it was just like a steady amount of content, not in terms of like the chapters are a fourth as long and we get them weekly. No, I mean like it's like twice as long if it was.
it would be we would
monthly.
get twice the content.
Yeah, if it was like
essentially,
Kishimoto's
for time frame.
manga rather than Ikimoto's pacing.
Yeah.
To where we just get like a weekly amount of pages per week instead of a monthly amount of pages per week, if that makes sense. Comparatively.
Yeah.
So instead of 10 pages,
mean,
we're getting like 20.
To some extent, yes. But to some extent, no, because none of our complaints have been that the pacing's too slow. You and I have
So I'm not saying that in terms of pacing. I'm saying because the pacing is as slow as it is, it allows us to nitpick on such a minute level to where I don't think I would normally be doing this. I think this is outside of what I would naturally do, regardless of you, obviously.
So, whereas I think there's some truth to that, I also just think that Vortex just has more to nitpick because it was just as monthly the first 70 chapters where we weren't doing this.
We didn't do the podcast the first 70 months, but I also agree.
I mean, I was doing YouTube from chapter 67 to 78 when we started the podcast. Yeah, that's true. And I plus, just did not have this many complaints. My complaints started on my YouTube channel concurrently independent of the podcast. I'd already complained about Boruto Scar before the podcast.
And plus, I can't pretend like we weren't heavily in the community before the podcast, as if we both weren't in the Cloud Ninja podcast server talking paragraphs every day or whatever.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Like... actively like enjoying the story or disliking whatever. Like I said, I didn't like Naruto not using or at least not addressing Boil release in the Jigen fight when it came out. It's not like that's a Kodachi thing I'm critiquing. So, bias aside, we'll admit things. So it's like I feel like whereas yes, we have more time to critique. I just think objectively there's more to critique.
Okay. Let me at least hear your thoughts on this. So let's just say it's the same amount of stuff to critique, but presented within the less time frame. I don't think we would be critiquing it as much. Because we would be more focused on the story since it's just moving on. It's moving along.
Yeah, you wouldn't. I mean,
we wouldn't have time to afford spending on the critique.
I would generally agree with you. Granted, knowing us, we would just put it in the podcast topics and insist that we'll get back to it eventually. But because even as it is, we don't have enough, we can't keep up. But like, for the most part, we would be focusing on other things too.
Because as it is now, we get to say literally everything we can possibly say on a chapter before the next month. Whereas if it was like weekly, it's like, okay, we really got to step up the pace and focus on the primary stuff, not the secondary stuff. Which would be like the focus. Be fair, we would have a focus.
To be fair, direction. If we were to look at like the quantity of our topics, I hate to say this, but it is absolutely 100% true. And I don't mean in the silly Naruto makes no sense playlist. It just, we objectively write probably at least 75% critiques. That's hard. Like, we praise, like I said, nobody praises Ada Jura like we do. We are the only ones talking about them narratively in this sense. I've never heard anyone else talk about it the same way as us. We are the praisers of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay. I also wonder
the shit out of everything else.
I also wonder to what extent is it, and I'm not gonna, okay, let me just get the full thought out before you counter it, because I already know what you're gonna counter, because you technically already have. I wonder to what extent it's because it's coming out now as opposed to a series that's already come out like Naruto. And yes, Naruto didn't have as many critiques objectively, regardless of looking back or looking in the moment or whatever, which would be the counter to that, I understand. But like, to an
I have another
extent,
counter
if we
anyway.
go back and like reread Boruto Chapter 2 now and like look at it holistically, are we gonna have as many nitpicks as the first time we read it? And yes, to be fair, obviously no, because it's like a reread anyways, but like like I feel like to some extent you could do a comparison there.
Well, the converse might also be true though, because for example, Attack on Titan, I am far more likely to notice nitpicks and critiques on my rewatch than I am on the first watch.
Yes, but then you get into the reason of why, and then it would be the same for Boruto. So. Well, but then again, I feel like that also doesn't count as much because at a manga you're going at your own pace. Same for a video game. For an anime, it dictates the pace for you.
I guess, but either way, I think the rewatch, I mean, you're just bound to notice / remember more in general.
Because you've already seen it all. You know where the story's going. You know who these characters
And
are
so
in their
you're just
introduction.
gonna pick up on new things, whether they're things to praise or things to critique.
Yeah, you know
You're just
who
gonna pick
lives, who
up on new
dies.
things in general. You might gain a greater appreciation for it. You might gain a greater critique / hatred for it.
Yeah, and
You
plus
know,
seeing what the payoff is, the setup, you can see what they're doing, why they're doing it a little bit more specifically. Even like foreshadowing, you might catch it a little bit easier, etc., etc.
right. And you know, like, for example, whenever we reread, so for example, like actually, so for me, for Boruto, as far as the manga goes, I read it and it was like chapter 20 something, I think, when I caught up. The first like 20 chapters, I just read through it, and then it just was coming out monthly for most of the car arc, really, and beyond. Um, so I really blitzed through the Owl arc, Mujina Bandits, and Momoshiki arc. So for as far as my experience goes, it's like, for the most part, it just was just as monthly for all these chapters anyway. So I think my nitpick argument would just apply the same. But whenever I reread stuff, like you and I do this, we just reread things from the Kawaki arc, and 9 times out of 10, we're just gassing up how good it was, and 1 times out of 10, we're pointing out this goofy thing like Baryon mode, whatever nonsense, where we're just like, oh, that makes no sense or whatever. So
Even
I just
that's
think
Ikimoto, so that I sorry.
exactly. So like, but ignoring that, it's kind of like, I think just objectively, we've said this a million times, but we just do like Kodachi's part more. We like the rest of part one for the most part more too, like Kodark and so on. It just, we just do like it more. We think it's objectively better, but if you think it's subjective, whatever. But we just clearly like it more. I don't know. Like I rewatched Death Note, Hunter x Hunter. I'm not nitpicking. I'm only finding things to praise from it, especially Hunter x Hunter. And interestingly,